The jury is still out on whether or not Jaxson Robinson will return to college, but if he does, will he become a Kentucky Wildcat?
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing Jaxson Robinson before he has to withdraw from the NBA draft. Will he return? Will he not return? And if he does, will he end up being a Kentucky Wildcat? Also, on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, four-star center Malachi Moreno has scheduled a visit with the Kentucky Wildcats. What do we know about him? Which players does he resemble? And there will be a couple of players that you may know on today's episode. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the show. And if you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, and right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. You can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Will Jaxson Robinson withdraw from the NBA draft? In case you don't know, Robinson has until tomorrow, Wednesday, May 29th at 12 p.m. Central to withdraw from the draft. And it's just a question of whether or not he's going to announce that later today, or if he's going to wait until the very last second to announce, or he may not announce at all. He may decide that he is, in fact, staying within the NBA draft. And as of right now, this is the update that we've had here on the show for quite some time. It's been very quiet, what has been coming out of Robinson's camp and what of reports have been indicating about whether or not Robinson will or will not stay in the draft. It is quite literally a 50-50 chance as of today. Now, I may get done with this recording and the news may break that Robinson has, in fact, decided to stay or return to college, but we're going to sit here and talk about it as if he hasn't, because as of to this afternoon, May 28th, he has not. If Robinson does return, I'm going to maintain the opinion that Kentucky has a very, very good chance to land him, according to official reports that we all trust, according to a couple of different BYU and Utah Jazz reporters over out in Provo. Recent conversations that those two have had on an ESPN radio show that we discussed a couple of episodes back, Utah Jazz beat writer and again a BYU news reporter as well. They had conversations about Robinson and essentially chalked it up to Robinson hasn't really talked to anybody outside of Mark Pope during this draft process. Those two are close. Pope has made it very clear that Pope wants Robinson to come play for Kentucky, and it's just a matter of whether or not Robinson returns to college. If he does, you would want to feel good about Kentucky's chances, because it's not necessarily going to be an NIL thing. It's going to be more of a familiarity thing. And that's really where the conversation ends today, is whether or not Robinson does end up coming back to college. Does he choose Kentucky, or does he choose BYU? In case you haven't seen, the Cougars, with new head coach Kevin Young, have been doing a lot of very positive things out on the recruiting trail. In fact, I believe they just picked up an international prospect today. That's a really big-time piece for them. But he's been doing well, getting guys to come back, getting a couple of different pieces in the transfer portal, and bringing in a guy like Robinson, bringing him back, essentially, I should say, I think would be absolutely on the cards for Young and his staff, especially when considering what they want to dole out in NIL money. Now, like I just stated a couple of minutes ago, according to the Utah Jazz and BYU beat reporters, NIL is not going to be a massive factor, but it is going to be a factor for these players at the end of the day, as to how much are they going to get paid. How much does Kentucky have to dole out for Robinson now that they have essentially 11 players, 10 players that they're looking at on this roster already. It's a question that needs to be asked. Of course, we all know that Kentucky at this point is going to be going all in on Jaxson Robinson, taking all of their attention, all of their money, putting it all on the table for his services for the 2024-25 season. But BYU, I absolutely think, is a team to look at here, a program, I should say, to look at here as the other legitimate contender for Robinson's services. Again, this is all if he does return to college. It's something that we need to monitor. Big time score that the Kentucky Wildcats need. And when you look at their roster up and down, I think it's pretty clear the Wildcats can make room for him. But this is something that you and I have talked about recently on the show. Whether or not the Wildcats can move things around comfortably to fit another wing on this roster. Because if you look up and down right now, the Kentucky Wildcats have 3 different players I think that would fit very well at point guard. Lamont Butler, Kirk Ariza, and Travis Perry. I think their center position is also figured out. Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison. I think their power forward spot is also figured out with Andrew Carr and Ainsley Almanor. But you look at the shooting guard and small forward positions. Colin Chandler, Kobe Brea, Jaxson Robinson, Otega Owe, and Trent Noah. Those are the 5 players that Kentucky right now would like to have in that rotation. Obviously, Robinson hasn't returned to college and hasn't committed to Kentucky. But Chandler, Brea, Owe, and Noah are the 3 players that you're looking at there, or 4 players that you're looking at there that could kind of rotate between those 2 spots. I think Colin Chandler is going to play the 2. I think he's going to play shooting guard. Kobe Brea primarily played small forward during his time at Dayton, but I think he could slide up to shooting guard here. In fact, if I had to guess, Brea would be Kentucky's starting shooting guard as of right now. Jaxson Robinson played the 3 and the 4, primarily power forward for the Cougars just a season ago, coming off the bench as their 6th man. Excellent 6th man, led the team in scoring. I think my guess is because Kentucky has things figured out at power forward, Robinson would primarily play the 3, and I think there's a world where they could slide him up to the 2 in a funky rotation. Now, is that what we expect to be the starting lineup for the Kentucky Wildcats if Robinson does commit? No, I don't think so. I think it would be Butler, Brea, and then Robinson at the 3, and then you maybe rotate him into the shooting guard spot with other players coming off the bench, most notably Otega Owe or Trent Noah. It's really difficult for me to look at Robinson, Owe, and Brea and realize that only 2 of them essentially can start here. Brea, obviously the best shooter in the country a season ago. Robinson, the best player on BYU's team a season ago in terms of draft prospect, I guess I should draft potential, I should say. Otega Owe, a very, very solid perimeter defender that would be insane to pair with Lamont Butler. I think either at that shooting guard spot, or you can move Owe down to 3. He played the 3 a little bit during his time at Oklahoma. Actually, no, excuse me. He primarily played the 3. And he played a little bit of power forward, which is just weird. And I know that there are a lot of comments out there that are saying, I can't believe you guys think that this player is going to play this position or this position or this position. Just kind of arguments. I shouldn't say the comments on social media about how this lineup is going to kind of fill out. I am just merely looking at how these players were utilized a season ago. And Jaxson Robinson was a power forward for the most part for BYU a season ago. Does that mean on this roster he's a 4? No. In fact, I think Kentucky has their work there at power forward with Carr and Almanor, like I just said. So I think he's a 3. But just understand, when we do these projections, when we talk about the starting lineup and we talk about the bench rotation and where these players fit, we're looking at, for these high school kids, what they were coming out of high school, what their position was labeled as, and how they played. We're watching how they played. And then we're also, for these transfer portal players, looking at KenPom and saying, okay, how did these previous teams utilize them? You go and watch their tape. How did their previous schools utilize them within their rotation? And obviously there are strengths and weaknesses to those rosters, as there will be with this Kentucky team, where you kind of move things around a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, I think Butler's your point guard. I think Brea is a shooting guard or a small forward. I think Robinson is a small forward. I think Owe is a shooting guard or a small forward, and I think Carr and Williams are your starting 4 and 5. If Jaxson Robinson does return to Kentucky basketball, which we will get a bit of news here very, very soon as to whether or not he is returning to college, period, which I hope he does. we will get to see, I think, Robinson perform very, very well in the blue and white, whether that be at BYU or whether it be at Kentucky. So let me know what you think about Robinson in the comments below. Will he return to Kentucky, to college and come to Kentucky? Will he return to BYU? As of right now, if I had to guess, I'd say that he is going to choose the Kentucky Wildcats at the end of the day. You can leave your comments below. All right, I want to talk a little bit about Malachi Moreno, who has scheduled a visit to Kentucky. It's a player that I think is very similar to a couple of players that you and I have discussed before on the show. I think there's some comps that we can give out here. Before we dive into that, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So you can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, continuing along here on the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky, Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, I really appreciate you guys checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it if you went ahead and did so. I want to remind you guys, if you have not joined the Locked On Kentucky Discord, at @LanceDawe_ is where you can find the link. It's pinned on my Twitter profile. Again, at @LanceDawe_. All right, so we've talked a little bit about Jaxson Robinson and about his current status. He has to make a decision soon. We are optimistic here on the show. You may think otherwise. Sound off in the comments. But we're also in the midst of an insane recruiting season for the Kentucky Wildcats. Kentucky has reached out to a ton of different high-profile prospects. They've gone and taken a look at some of them during the EYBL circuit in Indianapolis. Lots of positive things to take away. Will Riley obviously is a massive, massive potential get for the Wildcats if they can just get him on campus here soon and they can maybe convince him to reclassify. I'd love to see him on next year's roster. We've talked about him a lot on the show recently. But there's a new player that the Wildcats are scheduling a visit with. And it is 4-star center Malachi Moreno. 6'11", 210 pounds. He is the number 38 overall prospect nationally, number 5 center, and number 1 player in the state of Kentucky. He's from Great Crossing. He's from Georgetown. And he is, according to, that's the 24/7 Sports composite. According to 24/7 Sports and their raw player rating, he's the number 27 overall player and number 3 center in the 2025 recruiting class. A ton of different high-profile teams over here talking about Malachi Moreno, and he is going to take a visit to a lot of them. He said, I'll probably start taking official visits late summer or early fall. I'll definitely take one to Indiana, Baylor, Kentucky, and Ohio State. I already took an official to Iowa, but I will definitely try and make it back up there. So he does plan to visit the Wildcats, the Hoosiers, the Buckeyes, the Bears, and he's already visited the Hawkeyes. He also really likes UNC, according to reports. He said, I love UNC. I love Coach Sean May. Me and Coach Davis talked the other week, and it was a pretty good conversation. He's a very funny guy and just a fun atmosphere to be around. He also talked a little about meeting Kentucky, Mark Pope, and a couple of staff additions, recent additions to the Wildcats program during, I believe, Team USA's men's U18, some sort of training camp that they were involved in. By the way, in case you didn't know, Jasper Johnson, Kentucky native, also selected on that Team USA national team as well, under the men's under 18 team, I should say. This is what Moreno had to say about Kentucky and Pope. They're a brand new staff, so them being here means a lot. And I know they have some other business to take care of, but just them showing up at the gym shows a lot of character. Coach Pope wants to bring home banner number 9. He sold out a press conference. He's got some class, and he knows what he's doing because he played there and won a championship. So Moreno obviously knows what Kentucky's about. He knows what Pope is about, and I'm sure once they are able to kind of build that relationship a little bit further, you will truly get to understand how he could potentially be utilized in Kentucky's rotation. I'll just go ahead and say this here. There's not a player comp out there. There's not a ton on this kid's scouting report-wise, so it's up to me to do my best to kind of draw this image for you in your head as to how this player operates. 6'11", 210. He looks a little bit more physical than that, 215, 220. He plays in the post almost exclusively. You'd think that a more thin frame would indicate that he is more of a versatile outside shooter or somebody that can space out just based on what we have seen and talked about with Mark Pope and his style of offense. But no, this is a player that at 6'11" operates exclusively around the basket. Now, he has shown recently a little bit of touch, and he showed it during, I believe, some Adidas camp here recently, where he's showing off a little bit of touch, a little bit around that paint area, being able to kind of do some face-up stuff, some different fadeaways, some different jump shots around close to the rim again. But he is primarily a post-up player, and he is getting really, really good at it as far as different moves, finishing over the shoulder, drop steps, finishing through players. Just a very, very solid player around the rim that is pretty dang efficient around there, I must say, as well. He is also notably a really, really good rebounder on both sides of the ball during his circuit here, if I'm not mistaken, during his junior season at Great Crossing. 16 points per game, over 13 rebounds per contest, 3.7 blocks, and 2.2 assists. So he did a little bit of everything while exclusively operating in the paint. You also notice there the 3.7 blocks per game. During an EYBL circuit, during an Adidas circuit, he also still averaged over 3 blocks per contest. He's a very solid rim protector, even though he may have a little bit of a more wiry frame. Obviously, we've discussed a ton here about what it takes to be a solid rim protector on the show, and it's not necessarily all about the blocks, and you can see that with a guy like Moreno, where it's not necessarily all about the blocks, even though he is able to corral 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 per contest. Good rebounder, good rim protector, very solid post player, efficient in the post as well. He's shooting over 61% from the floor, 61% from inside the arc, I should say. He's a very solid prospect as more of a little bit of a throwback, I guess I should say, kind of player when it comes to his offensive game. And the two players that he really reminds me of, one of them not so much, the other one very much so, are Noah Waterman from a season ago at BYU, and Janai Broome, who plays for the Auburn Tigers. Noah Waterman obviously stepped outside and shot a ton of threes, but in terms of frame, nearly identical to Waterman in my opinion. Similar in the post, but more importantly, both players are very, very good cut players. Moreno scores a ton off of cuts, as did Waterman. He was definitely one of those players that was better being a recipient of the ball, playing off ball, running different sets, things like that. I think Moreno, obviously, based on his film, you pair him with a really good passing guard, and he will be able to execute. He's an excellent player in the dunker spot. The other player, Janai Broome, I compare him to Broome simply because of his ability to finish around the rim and his ability to defend the rim as well. Obviously, Broome, a little bit more physical, has more weight to him. Similar height there. I believe Broome is 6'10", 6'11". It's somewhere around there. I've seen him in person. He could be as short as 6'9". I don't know. He's up there as far as being a forward/center. But you look at a guy like Moreno, and they do similar things as far as just being able to finish in similar ways around the rim. They both have very solid post-up games. They also both do a really good job of contesting shots at the rim. If you're not going to get a hand on the ball, you're at least going to contest it, block the line of sight of the offensive player, and make sure that his life is difficult trying to get the ball in the hole again around the rim. Both of those players do that very, very well, and I think that Moreno would be an excellent addition for Kentucky basketball just based on the fact that he's able to do kind of the nitty-gritty things that this past roster could not do very well. This past roster couldn't rebound very well. They could not protect the rim to save their life. They also didn't have any players with a solid post-up game. Bradshaw, Ivasic, Onyenso, none of them had a solid post-up game whatsoever. The only player on this roster that had an inkling of a post-game presence was Trey Mitchell. it's crazy to think that we have just kind of forgotten about Trey Mitchell so quickly now that he has come and gone. But there were so many different things that he did to kind of hold this team together, especially essentially being the only 5 that Kentucky had for a very long time. He deserves more credit for what he did and how he fought through his injury a season ago. But Malachi Moreno kind of plugs some holes in some areas that Kentucky has been deficient in seasons past. I'd like to see him on campus. I'd like to see what he thinks about Pope and company. His full list of offers, according to Cat's Paws 24/7 Sports, includes Alabama, Arkansas, Baylor, Clemson, Creighton, Eastern Kentucky, Florida, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisville, LSU, Michigan, Missouri, NC State, North Carolina, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, Providence, Purdue, Syracuse, Tennessee, USC, and Virginia Tech. Like I mentioned, a ton of different high-profile programs after this kid. So let me know what you think about Moreno in the comments below. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcasts. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.